I never thought my life's biggest twist would arrive on a random Thursday night when someone knocked on my apartment door so hard it nearly stopped my heart. I was sitting in front of my laptop, finishing an assignment that was already 2 days overdue, when the sound came. At first, I ignored it. Probably some drunk neighbor who got the wrong floor. But then the knock came again, louder this time, more desperate, more broken. I opened the door and what I saw completely stole my breath. It was him, Morris Blake, my father's business partner, the man I'd only seen at formal dinners and awkward family events over the past 4 years. He was always in sharp suits, always composed, always untouchable, like some kind of corporate statue that didn't know how to crack. But tonight, he was someone else entirely. His shirt was wrinkled, the collar loose and halfway unbuttoned. His hair, usually slicked back perfectly, fell across his forehead in messy waves. And his eyes. God, his eyes had this emptiness I'd only ever seen in people who were completely shattered. He held a half-empty whiskey bottle in his left hand and his entire presence screamed silent desperation. "Morris?" I barely whispered. He looked at me, really looked at me, and then stumbled forward into my apartment. I tried to catch him, to steady him, but he was so much heavier than I expected. We both nearly lost our balance, his weight pressing against me for just a second before I managed to guide him toward the couch. "Don't call him," he said, his voice shaky and rough around the edges. "Please, Luther, don't tell your father I'm here." My brain completely froze. Luther, that's me. Luther Hayes, 22 years old, fresh out of college, and currently completely clueless about how to handle whatever situation was unfolding in my living room. "Morris, what happened? Are you okay?" I asked, helping him sit down on the couch. He didn't just sit, he collapsed. His elbows hit his knees and he buried his face in his hands. For a second I thought he might actually be crying. But then he lifted his head, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't just pain. It was something else. Something darker. Something raw and unfiltered. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine." I stood there, heart racing, mind spinning in circles. This wasn't the Morris I knew. This wasn't the man who attended board meetings with my father, who always kept his emotions locked behind a professional mask. This was a stranger, a broken stranger. And for some reason, he'd come to me. "Pretending what?" I asked slowly, lowering myself onto the couch beside him, keeping enough distance that it felt safe but close enough that he knew I was listening. He turned to look at me, and that's when I saw it. Something in his gaze shifted. Something that made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't quite name. Something that made me aware of every inch of space between us. "Pretending that I don't see you," he said, his voice dropping to something low and dangerous. My breath caught in my throat. "What?" He set the bottle down on the side table with a dull thud, then leaned forward just slightly. Just enough that I could smell him. Whiskey mixed with expensive cologne and something else I couldn't quite identify. But that made my pulse quicken. "I see you, Luther," he continued, his words deliberate and measured despite the alcohol. "I always have, and I hate myself for it." My heart was pounding so hard in my chest I was certain he could hear it. I wanted to say something, anything, but I had no words. Because deep down, some forbidden part of my mind had already processed what this confession meant. And I didn't know if I was terrified or thrilled. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to think rationally. "Morris, you're drunk. You don't mean what you're saying right now." He laughed, bitter and hollow. "That's the thing, Luther. I'm not that drunk. I know exactly what I'm saying. I've known for years." Years? The word hung in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. "How long?" I asked before I could stop myself. He ran a hand through his messy hair, looking away from me for the first time since he'd sat down. 3 years. Maybe longer. I don't even know anymore. 3 years? That would mean I was 19 when this started for him. Barely an adult. Still figuring out who I was. "Why are you telling me this?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Because I'm tired," he admitted, finally meeting my eyes again. "I'm tired of pretending you don't exist every time you walk into a room. I'm tired of making excuses to avoid family dinners. I'm tired of lying to myself that this feeling will just go away if I ignore it long enough." I should have told him to leave. I should have stood up, opened the door and asked him to go home and sleep off whatever crisis he was having. That would have been the smart thing to do. The right thing to do. But I didn't move. "You're my father's best friend," I said quietly, stating the obvious because I didn't know what else to say. "I know." His jaw tightened. "Believe me. I know. He's the most important person in my life. We've built everything together. And here I am, crossing every line we've ever drawn." The air between us felt heavy, charged with something I'd never experienced before. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing one wrong move would send everything crashing down. "What do you want from me?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, and his words changed everything. "I want you to tell me I'm wrong. I want you to say this is all in my head. I want you to make this easier for me to walk away from." But I couldn't do that, because somewhere deep inside, in a place I'd been ignoring for longer than I wanted to admit, I knew he wasn't wrong. "I can't," I whispered. His eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across his face. "What?" "I can't tell you you're wrong." The confession fell from my lips before I could take it back. Because I'd be lying. The silence that followed was deafening. We sat there, two people who shouldn't want each other, who had every reason to walk away, but neither of us moved. Morris's hand lifted slowly, hovering near my face like he was afraid touching me would make all of this real. His fingers trembled slightly before they finally made contact with my cheek. Gentle, hesitant, like he was holding something precious that might break. "This is wrong," he breathed. But he didn't pull away. "I know," I replied, but I didn't move either. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet darkness of my apartment with only the distant sounds of the city outside, we both knew the truth. There was no going back from this. I lived alone in my apartment. My father had insisted I become independent after graduation. But right now, I wished someone else was here. Someone who could tell me how to handle this situation that was spiraling completely out of my control. Because Morris was still sitting on my couch, his gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin burn, and I could feel something irreversible happening between us. His hand was still on my cheek, his thumb tracing a slow line along my jaw. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to stop this, to push him away, to remind him why this could never work. But I couldn't move. "Tell me to stop," Morris said softly, his face moving closer to mine. "Tell me to leave and never come back." I opened my mouth to say exactly that, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my eyes closing for just a second as I tried to process what was happening. Luther. My name on his lips sounded different than it ever had before. Intimate, desperate, like a prayer and a curse all at once. "You should go," I finally managed to say, but there was no conviction in my voice. "Should I?" he challenged, his other hand coming up to cup the other side of my face. "Because you're not pushing me away." He was right. I wasn't, and we both knew what that meant. I forced my eyes open, meeting his gaze head on. "You're going to regret this tomorrow." "Probably," he admitted, with brutal honesty. "But right now, I don't care." Something inside me snapped at those words. All the restraint I'd been holding on to, all the rational thoughts telling me why this was a terrible idea, they all shattered in an instant. I closed the distance between us. The kiss was nothing like I'd imagined. It wasn't soft or gentle or tentative. It was desperate and hungry and full of 3 years' worth of suppressed feelings. His hands tightened on my face, pulling me closer, and I grabbed the front of his shirt, not caring that it was already wrinkled beyond repair. Morris made a sound low in his throat, something between a groan and a sigh of relief, and that's when reality started to creep back in. This was actually happening. I was kissing my father's business partner, the man who'd known me since I was 18, the man who was nearly 15 years older than me. I pulled back slightly, breathing hard. "We can't." "I know," he agreed, but his hands didn't leave my face. "My father." "I know," he repeated, his forehead pressing against mine. "This is insane. Completely insane," he confirmed. But neither of us moved away. We stayed there, caught in this impossible moment, both knowing we were about to cross a line we could never uncross. "One night," Morris whispered, his lips brushing against mine as he spoke. "Let me have one night where I don't have to pretend." I should have said no. I should have been the responsible one, The one who thought about consequences and complications and all the ways this could destroy everything. Instead, I kissed him again. This time, it was slower, deliberate, like we were both trying to memorize every second because we knew it couldn't last. His hands moved from my face to my shoulders, then down my arms, leaving trails of heat wherever they touched. Your father would kill me if he knew, Morris murmured against my mouth. Then let's make sure he never finds out. I replied, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. He pulled back just enough to look at me properly, his eyes searching mine for something, doubt, maybe, or regret. But I didn't give him either. Instead, I reached up and ran my fingers through his messy hair, pulling him back down to me. The couch wasn't comfortable, and the angle was awkward, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Morris's hands felt on my body, careful but possessive. What mattered was the way he whispered my name like it was the only word he knew. What mattered was that for the first time in years I felt completely alive. We didn't have sex, neither of us was ready to cross that particular line. But what we did share was intimate enough to change everything. Clothes were adjusted but not removed. Boundaries were tested but not completely broken. And through it all, there was this underlying current of desperation. Like we both knew this moment was stolen time that we'd have to pay for eventually. When we finally stopped, when reality came crashing back down around us, Morris's head was resting on my shoulder and my fingers were still tangled in his hair. We were both breathing hard, both trying to process what had just happened. This was a mistake, he said quietly, but he didn't move away from me. Probably the biggest mistake of my life. I agreed, but I tightened my grip on him instead of letting go. We can't do this again. No, we definitely can't. Another moment of silence passed. Then Morris lifted his head, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Part regret, part longing, part something else I didn't have a name for. I should leave before I make this worse, he said, but he made no move to stand up. Yeah, you probably should, I replied, but I didn't let go of him. We stayed like that for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Two people who'd just done something irreversible, both trying to figure out what came next. Finally, Morris did pull away. He stood up slowly, adjusting his shirt and running a hand through his hair in a futile attempt to look presentable. I watched him from the couch, my heart still racing, my mind still trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. Luther, he started, then stopped. Like he didn't know how to finish that sentence. Don't. I cut him off. Don't apologize. Don't make promises about what this means or doesn't mean. Just go home and sleep it off, and we'll figure out the rest later. He nodded slowly, grabbing his jacket from where it had fallen on the floor. He walked to the door, his hand on the handle, and I thought that would be it. He'd leave and we'd both pretend this never happened. But then he turned back to look at me one more time. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I've never regretted anything less. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in my apartment with the ghost of his touch still burning on my skin and the knowledge that my life had just become infinitely more complicated. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment over and over in my mind. The way Morris had looked at me, the way he'd kissed me, the way his hands had felt on my body. Every detail was burned into my memory with perfect clarity, refusing to fade even though part of me desperately wanted it to. When morning finally came, I dragged myself out of bed and made coffee, trying to convince myself that I could just move forward like nothing had happened. That this was just a weird, isolated incident that we'd both forget about eventually. My phone buzzed around 8 in the morning. A text from Morris. Can we talk? 3 simple words that made my stomach drop. I stared at the message for a full minute before typing back. When? Now? I'm outside. I looked down at myself, still in the same clothes from last night. Hair a mess, probably looking exactly like someone who hadn't slept. But I opened the door anyway. Morris stood in the hallway looking completely different from the broken man who'd shown up last night. His hair was neat, his clothes were fresh, and his expression was carefully neutral, the professional mask firmly back in place. Come in, I said, stepping aside. He walked past me and I caught a whiff of his cologne. Different from last night. He'd gone home, showered, changed, erased all physical evidence of what had happened between us. I made a huge mistake last night, he started the moment I closed the door. Something sharp twisted in my chest. I see. No, you don't. He turned to face me and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Coming here was the mistake. Putting you in that position was wrong. But what happened between us? He stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. I can't regret that, even though I know I should. I crossed my arms, trying to protect myself from whatever was coming next. So what now? You want to pretend it never happened? That would be the smart thing to do, he admitted. But I don't think either of us can actually do that. He was right, of course. I'd spent all night trying to convince myself I could forget, and it hadn't worked at all. Your father can never know, Morris said firmly. That's non-negotiable. If he found out, it wouldn't just end our friendship. It would destroy his business, his trust, everything he's built. I understand that, I replied quietly. Do you? His voice took on an edge. Because this isn't just about us. Luther, your father has been my partner for 15 years. He's the reason I have everything I have today. And if he discovered that He trailed off, shaking his head. He'd never forgive either of us. The weight of that truth settled over the room like a heavy blanket. He was absolutely right. My father was traditional, strict, and fiercely protective. Finding out his business partner and his son had crossed this line would shatter him. So what are you proposing? I asked. That we just never speak about it again? Morris moved closer, his expression intense. I'm proposing we make a deal. What happened last night stays between us. We act completely normal around your father. No weird looks, no tension, nothing that would make him suspicious. And between ourselves? He hesitated. We maintain appropriate boundaries. No more late-night visits. No more moments alone where we might lose control again. It was the logical solution. The mature, responsible way to handle this situation. But something about it made me angry. You really think you can just flip a switch like that? I challenged. Pretend you don't feel anything? I have to, he said simply. Because the alternative is losing everything that matters to me. Everything except me, apparently. The words came out more bitter than I intended. And I saw Morris flinch. That's not fair, he said quietly. Isn't it? I moved closer to him. Close enough that I could see the way his jaw tightened. You came to my apartment. You told me you'd been watching me for 3 years. You kissed me like I was the only thing that mattered in the world. And now you want to act like I'm nothing? You're not nothing, he said forcefully. You're too much. You're everything I can't have, and that's exactly the problem. We stood there barely a foot apart, the air between us crackling with unresolved tension. I could see him fighting with himself, see the war going on behind his eyes. If we were different people, he said slowly, if the circumstances were different, if you weren't his son and I wasn't his partner. But we're not different people, I interrupted. We're exactly who we are. So we either deal with that or we don't. And what would you have me do? He asked, his voice dropping to something raw. Risk everything? Destroy your relationship with your father? Blow up my entire life for something that might not even work? I'm not asking you to do any of that, I said. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself about what you want. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see him calculating odds and consequences in his head. What I want doesn't matter, he finally said. What matters is doing the right thing. And the right thing is pretending last night never happened. Yes. The finality in his voice hurt more than I expected. Fine, I said, stepping back. We'll do it your way. We'll pretend. We'll be professional. We'll make sure my father never suspects a thing. Relief flickered across Morris's face, but it was mixed with something that looked like disappointment. Thank you, he said softly. But I have one condition, I added. He looked at me warily. What condition? You have to answer one question honestly. No corporate speech, no carefully worded deflection. Just the truth. All right. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for his answer. If I wasn't his son, if there were no complications or consequences, would you want to be with me? Morris closed his eyes and for a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he opened them again, looking directly at me with an honesty that took my breath away. Yes, he said simply. Without question, without hesitation. Yes. Something in my chest loosened at those words, even as another part tightened with the knowledge of how impossible this situation was. Okay, I said. Then we have a deal. We keep our distance. We act normal. And we never speak of this again. Morris nodded, moving toward the door. But just before he opened it, he turned back one last time. For the record, he said quietly, this is the hardest thing I've ever had to walk away from. Then he left, and I was alone again with a promise neither of us really believed we could keep. I thought that after Morris left, everything would return to normal. That I'd settle back into my life and this whole messy situation would fade into just another strange memory I'd eventually forget. Life is never that simple. Exactly 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. Dinner this Saturday. Your presence is required. Morris will be joining us. Important announcement to discuss. My heart sank into my stomach. I tried everything. I sent back excuses, told him I had prior commitments, that I wasn't feeling well, that I had work deadlines. But my father wasn't the type to accept refusals. His response was brief and final. Not optional. See you at 7. So now here I was, sitting at the dining table in my father's luxurious penthouse, with Morris Blake seated directly across from me like this was just another ordinary business dinner. He looked completely different from the broken man who'd appeared at my door. The sharp navy suit fit him perfectly. His hair was impeccably styled and his expression was professionally neutral. Like absolutely nothing had happened between us. Like he hadn't kissed me, like he hadn't confessed feelings he'd harbored for years. But I noticed the small details. The way his fingers were clenched tight beneath the table. The slight tension in his shoulders. The fact that he hadn't made eye contact with me even once since I'd arrived. My father was practically glowing with excitement. Gentlemen, he announced, raising his wineglass slightly, I have some excellent news to share with both of you. I forced a polite smile even though my stomach was churning. What's going on, Dad? Morris and I are heading to Japan next month, he said, beaming. 2 weeks. We're finalizing the expansion deal we've been working on for the past year. He turned to look at me directly. And Luther, I want you to come with us. My smile froze on my face. Excuse me? My father laughed, clearly mistaking my shock for excitement. You just graduated. You need real-world experience, and this is the perfect opportunity. Morris has already agreed to mentor you during the trip. You'll sit in on meetings, learn how international business works, make valuable connections. I glanced at Morris, who was staring intently at his wineglass, like it held the answers to the universe. I could practically see him calculating in his head just how disastrous this situation could become. Dad, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Nonsense, my father interrupted firmly. This is exactly what you need. No arguments. The flights are already booked. You're coming. Just like that, my fate was sealed. There was no negotiating with James Hayes when he'd made up his mind about something. The rest of dinner was excruciating. I pushed food around my plate, barely tasting anything, while my father discussed business details and Morris responded with carefully measured answers. Every time I tried to catch Morris's eye, he deliberately looked elsewhere. When dinner finally ended and I stood to leave, I felt a hand grip my elbow in the hallway outside the penthouse. Morris pulled me around the corner, out of sight from the door. His professional mask had slipped slightly, revealing the stress underneath. We have a serious problem, he said quietly, his voice tight. You think? I shot back. 2 weeks in Japan together wasn't exactly part of our maintain distance plan. I'm aware. He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its perfect styling. But fighting your father on this will only make him suspicious. We have no choice but to go through with it. So what do you suggest? I crossed my arms. That we just pretend we can handle being in close quarters for 14 days straight. We'll have to. His jaw was set in that stubborn way I was starting to recognize. We need ground rules. Clear boundaries that we both agree to follow. Such as strictly professional behavior at all times. He stated firmly. No private conversations that aren't business related. No time alone together unless absolutely necessary. No. He paused, seeming to struggle with the next words. No acknowledgement of anything that happened between us. I stared at him, anger suddenly flaring in my chest. You really think you can just flip a switch and act like I'm nothing but your business partner's son? I have to, he said, but I heard the strain in his voice. Because the alternative is risking everything. Everything except what I might want, apparently. Morris flinched like I'd slapped him. That's not fair. Isn't it? I stepped closer, lowering my voice even further. You came to me, Morris. You're the one who crossed that line first. You don't get to decide now that we just erase it all. I'm not trying to erase anything, he said through gritted teeth. I'm trying to survive this without destroying 3 lives in the process. We stood there in the dimly lit hallway, the tension between us almost suffocating. I could see the conflict written all over his face, duty warring against desire, logic fighting emotion. Your father trusts me, Morris said finally, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. He's trusted me for 15 years. He brought me into his business when I had nothing, made me his partner. And now he stopped, shaking his head. I'm betraying that trust in the worst possible way. Something in his expression made my anger deflate slightly. He wasn't just worried about losing his business partnership. He was genuinely torn apart by the guilt. You haven't betrayed anything, I said, softening my tone. Nothing has actually happened. Not really. Are you serious right now? Morris looked at me incredulously. Luther, I kissed you. I touched you. I told you things I had no right to say. That's a betrayal of every line that should exist between us. Only if you actually regret it, I challenged. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because we both knew he couldn't honestly say he regretted it. This trip is going to be impossible, he said instead, deflecting. Only if we let it be. What's that supposed to mean? I took a breath, making a decision I probably shouldn't have. It means we survive these 2 weeks by actually being honest with each other instead of pretending. We acknowledge what happened. We don't act on it, but we also don't lie about it existing. Morris studied me for a long moment, clearly weighing the suggestion. You think that would work? I think lying to ourselves makes everything harder, I replied. But if we're clear about boundaries and stick to them, maybe we can actually get through this. He seemed to consider this, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Clear boundaries, no crossing lines. But we stop pretending there's nothing between us. Exactly. That's a dangerous game, Luther. So is lying to ourselves for 2 weeks straight. Morris exhaled slowly, and I saw the moment he made his decision. All right, we'll try it your way. But if either of us starts to slip, we course correct immediately, I finished. I know, he nodded, then glanced back toward the penthouse door. I should get back before your father wonders where I went. Morris, I called as he started to walk away. He paused, turning back. For what it's worth, I don't think you're betraying him. I think you're just human. Something flickered in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe. Or sadness. Being human doesn't make it right. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the hallway with the knowledge that the next 2 weeks were either going to resolve everything or destroy it completely. Tokyo was beautiful in the way that made your chest ache. Neon lights reflecting off rain-slicked streets. The constant hum of life even at midnight, buildings that stretched toward the sky like they were trying to touch something impossible. For tourists, it probably felt like a dream. For me, it felt like slow torture. The first 3 days followed the same pattern. My father scheduled back-to-back meetings with potential investors, dinners with clients that stretched late into the night, presentations that required Morris's full attention. I mostly stayed in my hotel room, reviewing documents and pretending I was learning something valuable about international business. In reality, I was just trying to avoid being alone with Morris. It was working surprisingly well until the 4th night. I was reading through a contract proposal when someone knocked on my door. I assumed it was room service with the dinner I'd ordered. But when I opened it, Morris stood there looking uncomfortable. Your father had to fly to Osaka, he said without preamble. Emergency meeting with the board there. He'll be gone overnight. My stomach dropped. Overnight? He wants us to have dinner together, Morris continued, not meeting my eyes. His instructions were very specific, something about team building and learning to work together. Of course, my father would orchestrate this. I can order room service, I offered, even though I knew it was pointless. He'll ask about it tomorrow, Morris replied. Trust me, it's easier to just go. So 20 minutes later, I found myself walking through Tokyo streets beside Morris, the silence between us heavy with everything we weren't saying. He led us to a small ramen shop tucked down a side street, the kind of place tourists never found, with only 8 seats and a chef who'd probably been making the same recipe for 30 years. The rain started just as we sat down, the soft patter against the windows that gradually built into a steady downpour. The atmosphere shifted into something intimate and dangerous, like the universe was deliberately trapping us together. We ordered in broken Japanese and halting English. The food arrived quickly, steam rising from the bowls. But neither of us seemed particularly hungry. "You've been avoiding me," Morris said finally, breaking the silence. "I thought that was the plan," I replied, keeping my eyes on my food. The plan was to be professional, not to act like we can't be in the same room. I set down my chopsticks, looking at him directly for the first time since we'd sat down. "What do you want from me, Morris? You're the one who made it clear nothing can happen between us." "I never said nothing could happen," he corrected quietly. "I said nothing should happen. There's a difference." "Is there?" I leaned back, studying his face. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly the same." He was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. The rain outside grew louder, creating a cocoon of white noise around our conversation. "You want honesty?" he asked, finally. "Fine. Being here with you pretending we're just business associates is killing me. Every morning I wake up and remind myself of all the reasons this can't. Every night I lie awake thinking about all the reasons I want it to anyway." My breath caught. "Then why are you fighting it so hard?" "Because wanting something doesn't make it right." His voice was strained. "Your father has given me everything. My career, my financial stability, my entire life. How do I justify throwing that away for something that might not even last?" "You're assuming it wouldn't last," I pointed out. "I'm assuming it's complicated," he countered. "You're 22, Luther. You just graduated. You should be out exploring life, meeting people your own age, figuring out who you are, not getting tangled up with someone almost old enough to be your father." "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't reduce this to just an age gap. That's not what this is about, and you know it." "Then what is it about?" He leaned forward, his intensity making the small space between us feel electric. "Explain it to me, because I genuinely don't understand. What do you see in this situation that makes you think it could possibly work?" I took a breath, gathering my thoughts. "I see two people who clearly care about each other trying really hard to pretend they don't. I see someone who's so worried about doing the right thing that he's making himself miserable. And I see a future where we both spend years wondering what might have happened if we'd just been brave enough to try." Morris stared at me, something shifting in his expression. "You make it sound simple. It doesn't have to be complicated." I insisted. "Yes, my father will be upset when he finds out. Yes, there will be consequences. But lying to him and to ourselves isn't protecting anyone. It's just prolonging the inevitable." "The inevitable," he repeated slowly. "You sound very certain that this is going somewhere." "I am certain," I said firmly. "Because I've spent 3 years watching you pretend I don't exist. And then one night you showed up at my door and finally admitted the truth. That's not that just goes away, Morris. No matter how hard you try to ignore it." He was silent for a long time, just looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. The rain continued outside. The shop's other patrons had left, and we were essentially alone in this small bubble of space and time. "If we did this," he said carefully, "if we actually tried to make something work, do you have any idea what you'd be giving up? The comfortable relationship with your father, the straightforward future he's planning for you, the simple life you could have with someone who doesn't come with all this baggage." "I don't want simple," I replied. "I want real. And this, whatever this is between us, feels more real than anything I've ever experienced." Morris closed his eyes briefly, like he was physically fighting against something inside himself. When he opened them again, they were filled with an emotion that made my heart race. "We can't do this here," he said quietly. "Not tonight. Not while your father is expecting updates. While we're supposed to be on business." "Then when?" I challenged. "When is it ever going to be the right time?" "I don't know," he admitted, and the raw honesty in those 3 words hit me harder than any declaration could have. We finished our meal in silence after that. But it was different from before. Not uncomfortable, exactly, but charged with possibility. When we finally left the restaurant, the rain had intensified into a full downpour. We didn't have an umbrella. Within seconds we were both soaked through, our clothes clinging to our bodies as we ran toward the hotel. By the time we reached the lobby, we were dripping water all over the pristine marble floors. and despite everything I found myself laughing at the absurdity of it. Morris looked at me, water dripping from his hair and something in his expression cracked. He grabbed my wrist as we reached the elevators, pulling me to a stop. "One night," he said, his voice rough. "Just one night where we stop fighting this. Tomorrow we can go back to being professional. But tonight," he stopped, searching my face. "Tonight I need to stop pretending." I didn't hesitate. "My room or yours?" "Mine," he replied. "It's farther from your father's." And just like that, every boundary we'd carefully constructed came crashing down. I woke up to silence and empty space. The hotel room was still dark, early morning light barely filtering through the curtains. I reached across the bed automatically, expecting to find Morris still there, but my hand met only cold sheets. He was gone. I sat up slowly, my heart already sinking, and that's when I saw him. He was fully dressed, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, urgent tones. His suitcase was open on the desk, half packed. Something was very wrong. He ended the call and turned, finally noticing I was awake. His expression was carefully blank, the professional mask firmly back in place. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice rough with sleep. "Your father called," Morris said flatly. "There's been a situation with the Osaka deal. We need to leave Japan immediately." I threw off the covers, suddenly wide awake. "Right now? We have 2 hours to get to the airport." He wouldn't look at me directly. "You should start packing." I moved toward him, trying to catch his eye, but he deliberately turned away to continue organizing his things. "Morris, wait. Last night was a mistake." He cut me off sharply. "I let the situation get out of control. It shouldn't have happened." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You don't mean that?" "I absolutely mean that." His voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "We crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Now we need to deal with the consequences." "Consequences?" I repeated, anger starting to replace the hurt. "What consequences?" "Nobody knows. Nothing has changed except that we finally stopped lying to ourselves." "Everything has changed," Morris said, finally turning to face me. His expression was hard, controlled. "I betrayed your father's trust. I took advantage of you. I let personal feelings interfere with professional responsibilities. That's not something I can just brush aside." "You didn't take advantage of anyone," I said forcefully. "I wanted last night as much as you did. Maybe more. That doesn't make it right." My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I grabbed it, seeing a message from my father that made my blood run cold. "Be ready in 20 minutes. Car is waiting downstairs. And Luther, we need to have a serious conversation when we get home. We need to have a serious conversation." Those words, those specific terrifying words that every child learns to dread. I looked up at Morris, who had clearly received a similar message based on the tension in his shoulders. "He knows," I said quietly. "Somehow he knows." "He can't know," Morris insisted, but I heard the uncertainty in his voice. "We were careful. Nobody saw us." "Then why does that message sound like he knows?" Neither of us had an answer for that. The flight back was a nightmare. My father sat in stony silence, responding to emails on his tablet but not speaking to either of us. Morris sat across the aisle, staring out the window with an expression that revealed nothing, and I sat between them, metaphorically if not literally, feeling like I was waiting for an executioner's blade to fall. When we finally landed and returned home, my father's first words were, "Luther, my study." "Now," Morris moved to leave, but my father stopped him. "You too, Blake. This concerns both of you." We followed him into his private study like criminals being led to sentencing. He closed the door behind us, moved to his desk, and pulled out a manila folder. He opened it without ceremony and placed a photograph on the desk between us. It was Morris and me, in Tokyo, outside the ramen shop. The angle suggested it had been taken from across the street, probably with a telephoto lens. You could see Morris's hand gripping my wrist. Could see the way we were looking at each other. It wasn't explicitly romantic, but it was intimate enough that no one could mistake the tension between us. I felt all the air leave my lungs. "Explain," my father said calmly. Too calmly. I opened my mouth but no words came out. What could I possibly say? How could I explain this in a way that wouldn't destroy everything? Morris stepped forward. "James, This isn't what it looks like. I'm not talking to you yet, my father cut him off, his voice sharp as broken glass. I'm talking to my son, Luther. I'm giving you one chance to be honest with me. What is happening between you and Morris? The test. This was a test. He wanted to see if I would lie to him. I looked at Morris, who was staring at me with barely concealed panic in his eyes, silently begging me to deny it, to protect us both. But I was so tired of lying. We're involved, I said quietly. Not loudly, not proudly, just stating a fact. It's not just that night in Tokyo. It's been building for a while. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my father's face carefully, saw the progression of emotions. Shock, disbelief, pain, and finally anger. How long, he asked, each word precisely enunciated. A few weeks, I admitted, since shortly after I graduated. Morris made a strangled sound beside me. I just confirmed his worst fears, had admitted to something he'd been desperate to keep hidden. My father turned his attention to Morris, and I'd never seen him look so cold. You, my partner of 15 years, the man I trusted with my business, my family, my son's future. His voice was shaking slightly. You've been sleeping with my son behind my back? It's not like that, Morris started. Then what is it like? My father demanded. Explain to me how this isn't exactly what it appears to be. Explain how I'm supposed to trust you with anything ever again. Morris had no answer. Because there wasn't one. There was no explanation that would make this okay, no words that would undo the betrayal my father felt. Get out, my father said finally, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Both of you, get out of my sight before I say something I can't take back. I was back in my apartment, sitting in the dark, when Morris finally called. Why did you tell him? His voice was tight with barely controlled fury. Why couldn't you just deny it? We could have explained away that photo. We could have said it was nothing. Because it would have been another lie, I replied tiredly. And I'm done lying. You've destroyed everything, he said bitterly. My partnership with your father, your relationship with him, our careers, everything we've both worked for gone. Maybe, I acknowledged, or maybe I've freed us from having to keep hiding, from having to pretend we're something we're not. Free, he laughed. But there was no humor in it. Luther, you've trapped us. Now we either have to walk away from each other, proving your father right that this was just reckless stupidity, or we double down on something that's cost us everything. What kind of freedom is that? I didn't have an answer, because he was right. There was no good option now. Every path forward involved pain and loss and consequences we weren't prepared for. Was it worth it? Morris asked quietly. Knowing what its cost, was last night worth all of this? I thought about that question, about Morris's hands on my skin, about finally being honest after years of hiding, about that moment of genuine connection we'd shared before everything fell apart. I don't know yet, I admitted honestly. Ask me again in a year. I might not be around in a year, he said. After what just happened, I might lose everything. Then I guess we'll find out together what we're really made of. There was a long pause. Then, I can't do this right now. I can't think about this. I need space. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there in my apartment, alone in the dark, with the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. I'd told the truth and potentially destroyed 3 lives in the process. But at least the lying was over. At least now we knew where we really stood. And whatever came next, whether it was reconciliation or complete destruction, at least it would be real. That had to count for something, didn't it?